All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back for another deep dive. If you're keeping up with India's journey, especially if you've got those UPSC exams on your radar, well, this one is going to be right up your alley. We're diving deep into a pretty bold claim that's been making waves in the science world. And yeah, it all stems from a recent article in The Hindu.
Exactly. We're going to take a close look at this idea that's been floating around that India is on track to actually overtake the United States when it comes to, well, just the sheer volume of scientific publications by 2029. Ambitious, for sure,
Yeah.
and definitely something we need to break down.
Totally. I mean, our aim here is to really unpack that prediction. We'll look at the numbers for sure, but I think the real meat of this is going to be figuring out like what those numbers actually tell us. Are we really about to become like a scientific superpower just because of how many research papers we're putting out? Or is there more to it? Things like investment, the quality of the research itself, even ethics stuff we can't just ignore.
You hit the nail on the head. Those are the core issues we got to tackle. The Union Minister for Science and Technology has been pretty vocal about this optimistic view, right, pointing to a fast growth in our scientific output. But here's the thing. When you put this ambition up against, well, the reality of how much different countries are actually putting into research and development financially, the picture gets, well, a little more complicated.
Right. Let's talk money because obviously big progress needs big resources. And when you look at the data, the global picture, I mean, the differences are kind of shocking. We've got countries like Israel pouring a whopping 6.3% of their entire GDP into R&D. South Korea is not far behind at 4.9%. Then you've got like Japan, the US, Germany, all over the 3% mark. Even China, massive economy that it is, they're still around 2.4%. So where does India fit into this whole investment landscape?
Sadly, India's spending on R&D is significantly lower, only about 0.67% of its GDP. And this huge gap, well, it throws a bit of a wrench in this whole idea of overtaking those other countries. It's hard to imagine catching up when some countries are putting 3, even 10 times more of their resources into the very foundation of science. We're talking about a tenfold difference between India and the front runners like Israel, a huge hurdle to overcome.
Yeah, it's like imagine trying to run a marathon, but you're only allowed to train a tenth as much as the other runners. Okay, so let's look at the publications themselves, the numbers. The Hindu article throws out some big figures. Since 2006, which is, when China really made this strategic push in science and tech, they've published a crazy 898,949 scientific papers. US is second with 457,335, and India, well, we're at 207,390. Growing, sure, but still a way to go.
It really highlights the scale of China's commitment, right? This strategic long-term investment in science and technology. Since 2006, with their medium to long-term plan, the impact on their output has been enormous. But, and you're spot on here, it's not just about how many papers you publish. We got to dig deeper, look at the quality, the influence of that research.
Right. It's not just about quantity, it's about quality. So how do you even measure that? Quality of research. It's kind of hard to pin down.
Scientists use a bunch of different metrics. One is citation impact, basically how often other scientists reference a paper. A lot of citations usually mean the work is important and influential. Then there's the H index, the Hirsch index, which looks at both productivity and citation impact for a researcher or even a whole group. And of course, the impact factor of the journal itself matters. Getting published in a high-impact journal, well, it carries more weight, kind of like having your article in a top-tier magazine.
Okay, that makes sense. So where does India stand on those metrics? How does the quality of our research stack up against the big players?
According to Clarivate, a pretty respected analytics firm, India CNCI, that's citation, normalized citation impact, sits at 0.879. Basically, it's a way to compare how influential research papers are, taking into account when they were published and what subjects they cover. Now, 1.0 is the global average impact. So India at 0.879, well, we're below that. China, for comparison, is at 1.12, and the US is at 1.25. And here's the real kicker. Out of 30 countries ranked on this measure of impact, India comes in at 28th place. So that kind of throws cold water on the idea of just overtaking the US in sheer numbers, right? It shows that while we are publishing, our work isn't having the same global impact.
28 out of 30. Yeah, that definitely changes things. And the article in The Hindu gets even more specific, right? They look at chemistry research as an example.
They do. If you look at publications in the top chemistry journals, say between 2017 and 2024, the gap becomes even clearer. The Journal of the American Chemical Society, JACS, that's like a big deal in chemistry. The U.S. published a whopping 8,503 papers there, China, 5,521, and India, only 305. That really shows the difference in high-quality output in a fundamental field like chemistry.
Wow, that's a huge difference. And it sounds like even within China, their research system is stronger, like across the board.
That's right. The analysis suggests that even some of the second-tier universities in China are often outperforming India's top institutions, even the IITs, in terms of research output. It points to some weaknesses in India's research ecosystem as a whole, funding, infrastructure, even the way research is conducted and incentivized.
So maybe we're putting out more papers overall, but they're not having the same impact. They're not getting into those top tier journals at the same rate. And that brings us to, I think, a really crucial point that the article brings up: research ethics and integrity. This sounds like a big deal.
It's a major challenge. One of the biggest concerns is the prevalence of what are called predatory journals. These are basically publications that, well, they care more about making money than about actual academic quality. They might have fake impact factors, made-up editorial boards, and the peer review process is basically non-existent. And this doesn't just inflate publication numbers. It seriously hurts the credibility of Indian research on a global scale.
And the article had some pretty shocking statistics about this, right?
Yeah, a 2018 study found that a crazy 62% of the world's standalone predatory journals are actually based in India. That's a huge problem. It means that a big chunk of research coming out of India is being published in outlets that, well, they just don't meet proper academic standards. And that, of course, undermines its credibility worldwide.
That's a crazy amount. And the article even mentions a specific case, the Omics Group, based in Hyderabad. Sounds pretty serious.
That's a perfect example of the problem. The Omics Group got hit with a $50 million fine by the U.S. Federal Trade Commission back in 2019 for basically deceptive publishing practices. They put out something like 69,000 articles in journals that falsely claimed to have peer review and high impact factors. Basically, they were exploiting the pressure on academics in India to publish, charging big fees for publications that had little to no real academic value. And that kind of unethical behavior, well, it prisons the whole scientific literature landscape.
69,000 articles, just churning them out with no real oversight. That's wild. And it makes you wonder how much of that supposed increase in India's publication numbers is because of stuff like this. And it's not just these predatory journals, right? The article talks about plagiarism and data fabrication in Indian academia, too.
Unfortunately, yes. Plagiarism, where researchers pass off someone else's work as their own, and data fabrication, where they just make up or manipulate their findings, these are both serious problems. And a lot of times they're driven by this intense pressure to publish or perish. The idea that your career depends almost entirely on how many papers you publish.
The article gives some pretty worrying examples, like that BHU professor accused of plagiarism in 2020 and the data fabrication scandal at ICER. These aren't just isolated cases, are they?
No, unfortunately not. The number of Indian research papers that have been retracted because of plagiarism or falsification, well, that number has been going up, which is definitely a red flag. It raises serious concerns about the trustworthiness of our scientific output.
And the peer review system, which is supposed to be a safeguard against these problems, well, it seems like that has its own issues in India, according to the article.
Yeah, peer review, where experts in the field evaluate a research paper before it gets published, that system often gets compromised in India. You've got researchers trying to game the system, suggesting reviewers they know will be friendly to their work, and some journal editors, especially in those lower quality publications, well, they might not be as rigorous as they should be in their evaluation. In 2019, over 250 Indian papers had to be retracted because of concerns about manipulated peer review and duplicate content. That really shows how widespread this problem is.
It all comes back to this publish or perish culture, doesn't it? It's like the whole system is set up to reward quantity over actual high-quality research.
Absolutely. And you compare that to leading science nations like the US, Germany, they put way more emphasis on quality and impact. The number of publications isn't everything. And this difference in focus, well, it has a huge impact on the kind of research that gets produced and how it's viewed by the global scientific community.
So what does this whole crisis in research integrity mean for India's ambitions in science? It sounds like it could have some pretty serious consequences.
It definitely does. This erosion of integrity, it's hurting India's reputation globally. International journals and indexing platforms are looking more closely at research coming from India, which means that even legitimate high-quality work might be met with more skepticism. That makes it harder for Indian scientists to publish in those top journals and get recognition internationally. For anyone following India's place on the world stage and its aspirations, This is a critical area where improvement is needed.
And it probably makes international collaborations harder too, right?
Exactly. Universities and research institutions in other countries might be less willing to collaborate with Indian researchers if they have doubts about the reliability and the ethical standards of the research being done. That limits India's access to global funding, to grants, to the exchange of talent and ideas, all things that are crucial for scientific progress.
So if India really wants to become a scientific powerhouse, what needs to change? The article lays out some key steps, right?
It does. First, we need a big increase in R&D investment. We need to aim for at least 2% of GDP. That would bring us closer to what those other leading nations are spending. Second, we need to strengthen our higher education and research infrastructure. China's strategic investments in universities and research institutions, that's something we can learn from. Better quality education, better research facilities, more financial support for scientists.
And what about this whole integrity issue?
We absolutely have to improve research integrity. That means stricter regulations to crack down on unethical publishing practices, more robust and transparent peer review, and stronger academic oversight at every level. And finally, we need to put more emphasis on translating research into practical applications. More innovation, more collaboration between academia and the private sector.
So it's not just about publishing more, it's about quality, ethics, and backing it all up with serious long-term investment. It's a whole strategy, not just a numbers game. The article ends with a quote from Einstein that really sums it up. Not everything that can be counted counts. Not everything that counts can be counted.
Perfect quote really captures the essence of the problem. India's ambition in science is great, and it's definitely important for anyone preparing for the UPSC exams, especially in areas like national development, science and technology policy, and even ethics in professional fields. But to become a true global leader, we need a shift in focus. We can't just chase publication numbers. We need to prioritize quality, integrity, and support it all with much bigger investments and a stronger research ecosystem.
So for everyone listening, especially those UPSC aspirants out there, this deep dive into India's scientific research landscape, it's hitting on some pretty crucial stuff. Things like national development, science and tech policy, and those ethical considerations that are always relevant, especially for daily UPSC mains current affairs. What aspects of India's research landscape are you most worried about? What reforms do you think are most important for India to really excel in science? Let us know in the comments, and if you found this discussion helpful for your UPSC prep, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into important topics. Oh, and the main source for all this was that recent article in The Hindu, just so you know.
And as you keep studying and thinking about these critical issues facing India, think about this. What happens when you prioritize rapid growth in things that are easy to measure, like how many papers get published? Does that come at the expense of the strength and integrity of the whole system? It's a question worth thinking about, especially as India aims for global leadership in all these different fields.